Okay, brilliant. Hello everyone. Shall we start? Jane, are you recording?
Yep.
Brilliant, thank you. Hi, so I'm Jemima from Mums for Lungs, and I'm really pleased to have so many people here on the webinar about school streets tonight. The other two people from Mums for Lungs on this webinar right now are Jane Dutton and Nikki Smitten, and they will be responding to questions in the chat, things like that. But basically, yeah, welcome. It's great that so many people are interested in school streets. We at Mums for Lungs think they're absolutely crucial. They make a huge difference, but the speakers who I'm going to introduce in a second will be speaking much more about that. But at Mums for Lungs, we are really in favour of school streets because they reduce air pollution at the school gates, where children in large numbers are clustered at drop-off and pick-up times. UNICEF report a while back highlighted really strongly that children breathe disproportionately large amounts of very polluted air on the school run, and school streets really help with that. They also encourage active travel. You know, if your commute is quite short and you have to walk a bit of it, you might as well decide to walk a larger part or the whole part of your school school run. 25% of traffic is sort of considered to be the school run at rush hour twice a day, so that is quite impactful and quite important that we bring these numbers down. Obviously, road safety is an issue around schools as well. And lastly, in the times of Corona, COVID, a respiratory pandemic, there is real concerns around the school gate and children and parents and pedestrians being just too close to each other. So the spillover that is possible for school streets is also really necessary and helpful. I haven't spoken a lot about air pollution being really terrible on children's health, on anyone's health in London especially, but I think most people who are joining this webinar probably know quite a bit of it. Air pollution affects us all. Traffic is a large contributor to air pollution, and air pollution can have an impact before children are born. They might be born smaller, low birth rate, respiratory illnesses. Later in life, diabetes, cancer, dementia, all of these are contributed to by air pollution. Questions on this webinar, let's have them in the chat. We will do a bit of a Q&A at the end. Sorry, I should have shown you this slide a moment ago, which just sort of highlights the reasons why we're in favour of school streets. The reasons that I named just now. And without further ado, I would like to quickly give you an overview over our webinar tonight. So firstly, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Etta Rooney, who's a parent and active travel campaigner, a cycling teacher, and advises schools and parents on school streets. She's done a lot of work, and I understand that together with Amy Foster, who is the PSHE Lead at Bessemer Grange Primary and the Healthy School Champion in Southwark, I understand that these two women were the absolute driving and leading forces on getting one of Southwark's first school streets at Bessemer Grange Primary School, which was already a while ago. So they've, you know, really done pioneering work on there, which is brilliant, and I think we're all very interested to hear what they can tell and teach us. And brilliantly, Michelle Jamieson, a senior transport planner at Camden Council with lots of expertise and experience on school streets, is going to talk about the council side of things. Camden Council already has 4 school streets and is starting another 8 by the end of September, which is pretty ambitious. And really interestingly, Camden has been implementing school streets under experimental traffic orders for a while. So, you know, these procedures that are now taking place because of Corona, these experimental emergency things, is what Camden had been doing anyway. So without further ado, I would really like to just hand over to Dr. Etta Rooney to tell us about the school streets.
Hello, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience of starting a school street at Bessemer Grange Primary School. So as Jemima said, I'm a parent. I did have 3 children at Bessemer Grange. I now have 2 children at Bessemer Grange. One of them's just moved on to secondary school. And when I first started going there, I noticed that there was a really significant problem with traffic outside the school, and that the school were really keen to do something about that. So I started working with Amy at that point on a number of different ways to address the traffic problems outside of school. One of those was school streets. So we have a look at what school streets are. They are a timed closure of the road outside of a school, and that timed closure coincides with the start of the school day and the end of the school day. So ours is from I think 8:30 until 9:30 in the morning, and our school start time, although it's staggered now for coronavirus, it used to be everyone in at 9. And we also close the road around 2:30 at the end of the day, and it can open again at 4:30, with the school ending time being 3:30 in the afternoon. So that really means that there's no access for motor vehicles to the road outside the school during those times. Now there's sort of a dual purpose to that. One is that it really prioritises the space being for people who are going to use active travel. So the space outside the school is for cycling, it's for scooting, it's for walking, and certainly up until January, with start with worrying about coronavirus, it was also a space for people to socialise outside of school. And that was quite an important aspect of the school street, which is something that's not going to be quite so important in the immediate future, is actually it reclaims that space outside of a school from the motor vehicle and gives it back to the school community. And it leaves you with a space that can be used for playing, it can be used for socialising. We also use the space outside of school for setting up and selling snacks, which helped raise money for the school, but it also helped the older children sort of take some responsibility for fundraising and learning about money. So there's a lot of really good reasons to have the space outside your school used for something other than just motor vehicle traffic. And as Jemima's also touched on already, there are huge benefits to the children from active travel, which improves health, but it also improves concentration. There's also improvements in local air quality, and there's a huge reallocation of space to people rather than cars. And that, I think, benefits not just the school community, but it also benefits the wider community around the school, including local residents. I think the biggest benefits that have come to local residents is that they are no longer subject to the significant amounts of antisocial parking that we used to see outside the school. And they're also no longer subject to the same problems with road safety or decrease in air quality around the school caused by school traffic. So this is a picture of what was happening before we had a school street at Bessemer Grange. And I think what's quite telling is that the road was absolutely full to the brim with cars. The vast majority of these cars were parked illegally. So you can see someone here is parking on the zigzags. Over here, people have parked on the double yellows. There are people mounted the pavement here, people getting in and out of their cars in really dangerous circumstances. One of the big problems we had was, you can see a car here is mounting the pavement right on the corner of a junction. And it was incredibly dangerous for children who were coming to and from school, because the cars would really drive very unpredictably and often quite fast. And they would also block sort of areas that were meant to be kept free to improve sight lines or to make it safe to cross the road. So it was causing road safety issues, as well as a lot of cars idling near the playground. But most importantly, there was a real lack of space at our school. So the school originally was much smaller than it is now, and it's now a very sizable school. there are 720-ish pupils on the roll. It goes up and down, and this school was not built in an area that can accommodate that many people on the pavements. So actually the lack of pavement space just alone made it quite unsafe, because people would always spill over into the road while waiting outside the gates. And this is something which is going to be ever more important outside of schools, is to make sure that there is enough space to accommodate people with appropriate social distancing. So this is a photo of the road outside the school after we introduced our school street. And it's the same picture that Jemima had up on her original slide. And the huge difference that you can see is just that this whole area, which used to be dominated by cars, is now full of people. And people are spread out, people are scooting and walking. Although we did have some people who were quite opposed to this to begin with, we did survey our parents before, immediately afterwards, and then about 6 months afterwards. And within a few weeks, we had 96% of parents saying that they appreciated and approved of this scheme. So parents' main comment is that having a school street really makes the environment feel safer and more welcoming. And something which is quite important, I suppose, for me in terms of my active travel kind of role, is that actually we saw a modal shift. So we saw 6% more people using active travel to get to school and no longer using their cars. And that is a really big change in behaviour caused by a very small inconvenience, because actually at Bessemer Grange, people only have to walk about 200 metres. And that was enough to make people stop driving to school. So it didn't need much of a disincentive to shift people into using more active travel. It's also made a huge amount more space for people when they are queuing to come in through the gates. And that's very, very important now. I saw when children were back at school towards the end of the summer term, the road space was being used for queuing for all the various different gates where children were entering and leaving the school. And having that available space meant that people could socially distance appropriately, which is really critical, I think, in primary school settings, especially where children are being picked up and dropped off, and they have to have an adult coming into that area too, and it creates a lot of foot traffic even just to get everyone in and out of school. So what now? Well, we need ever more space around our schools, and we definitely need ever more capacity for active travel to ensure that people are not making unnecessary car journeys. They're leaving road space for essential car journeys through London. The ability to use public transport is going to be decreased, and so we need to make the environments as safe as possible so that people feel that they can make the choice to cycle or scoot or walk to school. So when you're asking for your own school street, what would be my top tips would be talk to parents and local residents, and that's probably the most important thing. What are the key problems at your school? What exactly are you trying to fix? Is it mostly about making space available for people? Do you have problem driving? Do you have antisocial parking? Is there a big pollution problem? And what is the geography of your school? Is there an obvious place where the road could be closed, or are you on a main arterial route, which is going to have to involve TfL, because that is obviously a very different situation than the one we had at Bessemer Grange, which is on a residential road. You also need to be aware of how your pupils do travel to school. So do people drive? And if people are driving or being driven to school, why is that? And is this going to disproportionately impact a specific demographic in your school, and how are you going to mitigate that? We have a park and stride set up at Bessemer Grange, so we're quite lucky to be near a big supermarket, and that supermarket allowed us to use their car park in the morning. So if people did have to drive, they could park in the supermarket car park and then continue the last 800 meters or slightly less, I think, on foot. And that really helps people with knowing that there is a place that if they have to drive, they can leave their vehicle and they can still access school in a reasonable time frame. Also, the other things to look at is what other work does your school do to promote cycling and scooting and walking? So Amy Foster had already done a huge amount of work to promote active travel, and we'd already seen a big shift in the school population using active travel to get to school. So this was sort of a final step for us, that we had really already moved a lot of people to considering this to be a safe way to get to school and a good way to get to school. And the final thing for us was to make it really the only choice for that last stage of your journey. So the car couldn't come immediately outside of school. And it's really important to communicate the benefits of your school street to the wider community and also to school children, because I think once people know that actually these schemes have huge benefits for everyone, the opposition does tend to drop away. It's also a good idea to talk to your local councillors, become versed in the use of traffic orders and the rules around traffic orders, get support from organisations such as Living Streets and Mums for Lungs, because they have huge resources, as does Hackney Council in particular, for school streets. They can give you a lot of information and a lot of resource. And the other thing to bear in mind is there will be people who oppose this, and you need to understand why do people oppose this scheme. You know, people will oppose the scheme for a variety of reasons. They often, if they drive, they will be inconvenienced by this, and that may cause them to be quite vocal in their opposition. Sometimes people oppose this on behalf of other groups, but perhaps groups that they don't really have particularly much contact with, such as the elderly or vulnerable people, which is something that I heard quite a lot. And in this case, it's really useful if you actually have already spoken to your residents and your parents and you know who those vulnerable people are. Do you have disabled pupils? How are they going to continue to access school? Are there a lot of elderly people who are residents who will be inconvenienced by having that short-timed road closure? And what do they actually think about this scheme? Because if you actually can talk to people and engage with their concerns, but reassure them that actually you've talked to those stakeholders in this process and they actually do like the scheme or they want it to go ahead, that can be really helpful. I think from my perspective, it was quite interesting. Just I'd have some sort of personal input on people trying to talk on behalf of, you know, generically disabled parents or children with people with disabled children at school. But also I'd engaged with already talking to people who, for example, wanted the disabled parking bays to stay in specific places, and was able to reassure them that yes, they would still always be able to access those parking bays if they needed them to get to school, either for themselves or for their children. And there's also, I suppose, the final thing is that nobody really likes change. And a lot of this change is happening really quickly. And often the objections to these schemes drop away very quickly after they start, when people start to see the benefits. And it can be very hard for people to imagine those benefits when all they can see is the inconvenience, which is very immediate. So you can always point people in the direction of existing schemes. Most councils in London now have school streets. And you can also direct people to engage with, for example, Mums for Lungs, who have lots of information about London-wide school streets. So those would be my top things to do. And it's mostly about communication and making sure that people are aware of what you're doing and why you're doing it. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you, Etta. This was really brilliant, such a great overview. I learned a lot, but yes, as you know, please everyone do get in touch with us at Mums for Lungs. We really want to help. Can I now hand over to Amy, please?
Okay, so let's hope the share screen is going to work for me this time. Okay, so please do shout if it's not coming up. It seems to be loading. And thank you so much, Etta. That was excellent. I will try and add on a little bit as I can. So as Jemima said, I'm Amy and I teach at Bessemer. And we have got these two awards, these gold awards. One is from Transport for London for their sustainable travel scheme that schools can buy into, that often you have to be engaged with if you want to apply for a school street. And the other is the Healthy Schools Award that we got because we have been sharing all of the ideas of what we've been doing around our school street. And so, as Atta already pointed out, we did have these terrible examples of what was happening at the beginning of the end of the day. And this was all the while we were hosting events that were really celebrating walking and cycling. And we'd been working with Sustrans at that time. And so we were doing all the fun things like the smoothie breakfasts for coming to school. And it helped us sort of work towards that gold award. But it did feel a lot like we were banging our head against a wall, that we were still inundated with worries and concerns from our parents about the fact that at the end of the day, they simply didn't feel safe, that often they were taking the children between the two sides of the road, and we would get people saying things like, I'm worried that a child is going to be hit by a car. And so it really made us start looking at what was happening further afield in Edinburgh, but also in London, and start thinking about how we could therefore campaign for Bessemer to get more of those same protections in place. And so we were very fortunate in having Etta amongst our parent community, and that she really took the lead on setting up a play street. And the advantage of having the play street, first of all, is it gave us the opportunity to sort of trial having our street closed. But also we've got these sort of great photos that we could start already promoting this aspect of having a car-free street as being something that is exciting and fun and that the children enjoy. And actually you can make it work, and it wasn't going to be quite as much as a headache as perhaps you might have thought it would have been without having that test. And it was also very useful at helping us influence our counsellors. As Etta said, it's really important to get them on board. And so we had different themed play streets. We had one around sort of road safety and also air quality, and each time we'd invoke the local councillors, also the officers from the council who are working with us on our school travel plan. And each time they came down, we could show them the fun things that were happening and how much we were working to promote active travel and a safe school environment, and keep asking them, so we've been seeing these things happening in Hackney, but when are they going to come to Southwark? And it took a while, it did take quite a long time, but finally we got there, and it was really something that we're very proud of, that we were the first school in Southwark to get the school street. And it did look amazing, and we were able to really celebrate it, inviting Will Norman down, obviously the Mayor's Walking and Cycling Commissioner, and again, sort of highlighting perhaps to our politicians that we weren't only ever going to be sort of complaining about what was happening outside. We were going to invite them to come and celebrate with us and show them how much we could do to help them as well. So if you are interested in a school street, what sort of things might you want to start talking about with your school community? So as I said, I was appointed the active travel champion when Sustrans came along, but you might not have that in school. You might not know if your school is engaged with anything like the STARS programme or working with Transport for London. So you might want to use something like the Childhood Obesity Task Force Ambitions for London they were published last year, but the team this week has been promoting them again because they're highlighting the fact that the physical environment in London is really impacting upon our children's health and well-being. And we have this obesity crisis. And so they have this ambition that in order to improve our children's health and tackle this obesity crisis, as I say, they really are calling for school streets and safe routes to school, and this reallocation, as Etta said, reallocating road space so that walking and cycling are prioritised above all other modes of transport. So that is one thing you can use to sort of start raising these with your school after you've talked with your fellow parents. And then in a more wider context, the National Education Union is also very much aware of the issues around air quality and how much severely it's impacting so many schools across the country. And they're very good at highlighting the link as well between disadvantage and air quality. And a few years ago, they had a very excellent piece in its membership publication, which highlighted the fact that 85% of the schools with the worst air quality are those with the poorest, most deprived intakes of students. So obviously that does raise a little bit of a question about what schools who are struggling or don't have who are from those disadvantaged communities, if they are able to do the things related to encouraging active travel that will get them a school street. And so I'd like to think that in future, perhaps it will be easier for these changes to come about and people won't have to work quite as hard as Etta and I did. And again, the union has this information online, and they're working with the British Lung Foundation as well as Living Streets, again, to be talking about how we can make that link between how we get to school and improving our air quality as well as our general health. And I think Etta highlighted or pointed out that there's this link now that's been worked on quite a lot by someone called Professor Adrian Davis, who's at Edinburgh Napier University. And it's this link between having an active journey to school and your behaviour for learning and your concentration in the classroom. So if you feel like your school community is perhaps a very academic one, or sometimes the head doesn't get very much excited about things that aren't related to sort of data, this is perhaps another way in you could sort of sneakily get in there that is going to help them, especially as we now know that thinking about coming back to school after COVID, there might be less opportunity for children to be physical in the day. The classrooms might be much more static. And so getting that exercise in the morning is really going to help them before they come in. But how can we help each other? So obviously this is a big question. So obviously we're so grateful for Mums for Lungs and everything they are doing. But I think continuing to share information is really critical. And as Etta pointed out, we're very lucky. Our school was in a cul-de-sac. The only traffic there really, or the poor air quality, was absolutely because of our parents and our parent community. But I don't want people to feel sort of disheartened or feel like nothing will ever change if they are in a trickier situation, because there are examples of huge schemes that have happened, the schools on those gyratories. But of course, what needs to happen is you need politicians with a vision and someone who's got a lot of money to go about that. And how do you get the politicians to have those visions? Well, you need residents or people like us to be talking about these things and saying change is possible, and we will be there supporting them when that pushback happens. So this is just a really a case study that I think is really exciting about the fact that Sir John Cass School, which is in Aldgate, used to have a gyratory all around the school, and they tried things like the green screens and air filtration units. But it was once the City of London moved to the gyratory and created a garden outside of the school that the pollution that the children were exposed to dropped below illegal levels. So there we go, our big scheme in London. And so, as I said earlier, the Mayor's Childhood Obesity Task Force is working really hard to talk about the physical environment in London and how it impacts our health. They've got an excellent video out today. And in it talks about all the ways that having active journeys to school for children helps our families, helps us. And it talks again about happier kids. And it is a shame that the government is really discouraging parents from gossiping, I think was the word I saw, outside of the school gates, because fundamentally, I think we all know that it's been a hard few months, and that the least we can do is talk to one another and make sure that those people who are feeling anxious about coming back to school have a chance to talk through those things. But I think having school streets and making that environment calmer and safer and taking out that stress is going to be really vital in encouraging those families who haven't been confident enough to send their children to school so far, who haven't been leaving home as much as we would have liked, into feeling that school is a safe place for their children to be. So think about that. And then finally, if you aren't quite sure who could be your well-being or your active travel champion on the school staff, and you're still trying to find someone, think about if you're spotted anything like a healthy week, and highlight the fact that teachers need to be healthy too. Physical inactivity is a massive price, not just for children but for adults as well. And we know that teaching is stressful, and so think about if you could persuade one teacher even just to swap one day of their commute for a walk or a cycle, or a combination of the bus journey and a little bit of a walk through my park. It could be one other way of helping you get that team together to fight for your school street, because you do absolutely need a team of you together. And there we go. Thank you, Jemima.
Thank you, Amy. I think that was really interesting. There were lots of ideas I wouldn't have thought about, and I think it was really, really interesting for me to hear that you're also highlighting the needs of teachers and bringing that in, because obviously, for School Street, we need more people wanting it, not just, parents. So brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us. Michelle, can I hand over to you now, please?
Yes, hi everyone. Hi, I'm Michelle from Camden. I work on the school streets in Camden, and have done for a few years now. I don't have a presentation with any slides, I'm afraid, that I can share, but I'm just going to talk through some of the points that Jemima suggested that I talk about, some of which has already been mentioned. In terms of Camden, we were the first London borough to implement school streets. That was on Macklin Street at St Joseph's School. That one we did with retractable bollards, and the school is still currently putting those up and down for us, or for themselves. Now that the scheme's implemented, that's been going for about 3 years, I think. Since then, for various reasons, a lot to do with safety, to do with schools perhaps not wanting to get involved in putting bollards up and down, we've gone more along the ANPR camera route. This means that we can exempt residents living within the zone of where the school is. So that's one of the advantages of using cameras. We have now, as Jemima I think said, we've got 4 currently in place in Camden, and hopefully by the end of September we'll have another 8. So we're getting them put in as quickly as we can. It did used to take 12 to 18 months from sort of deciding on which school we were putting them in to actually launching. It's now reduced down to sort of 5 or 6 months due to COVID, and as we've got a programme to roll them out now, so hopefully we'll be rolling them out more quickly. TfL and the funders, so DFT, are funding these school streets as very much as part of low traffic neighbourhoods, which is something LTNs, I think has been mentioned. And yeah, going forward, we're going to be trying to include them in our LTNs. If they happen to have a school there, we'll most certainly look at doing a school street within that LTN. Or it could be that a school is just benefited by the fact that through traffic is perhaps reduced because of the low traffic neighbourhood that's put in. As I mentioned, we use exemption lists for residents that live on the street where the school is. There's also other exemptions, such as blue disabled badge holders who live on the street, who can come in and out. And we do, and I think most other boroughs do, also exempt children that perhaps have got physical disability or any sort of disability that would stop them being able to walk, scooter or cycle to school. So we can exempt the vehicles that bring them. Some come in taxis, and we've exempted those taxis as well. In terms of costs, yes, there's revenue from cameras. In Camden, we're still sort of in discussion as to where that revenue is going. I don't have kind of figures on me about that, or details of how that's used. I think at the moment it's our parking team that deal with that sort of revenue. The cost is around, with the camera scheme and everything else, all the other things that go with it, ballpark figure of, say, I don't know, 60,000 to put 60 to 70,000 perhaps to get to as the cost to the council to actually implement. Yeah, lots of hidden costs to do with electrics, lighting columns, etc., etc. Push that cost up a little bit. In times of Corona, I would say when I first started working on these schemes, a lot of the correspondence that I get from parents, from residents, would be concerns about what the scheme is. I think now it's more of a nationally recognised thing, which is great. Organisations such as Mums for Lungs, and we've got our local NW3 school run group who sort of putting the word out there for us, and Camden Cyclists also, as well as Sustrans, Living Streets. I just think, you know, and there's those bits of research that we've already sort of mentioned tonight. I think it's a more recognised idea. So the correspondence isn't so much about what is it. It's more just about finite details of how it affects themselves, like the parents or the residents. Yeah, I mean, the main difference now is that instead of how we used to do it was we'd do a consultation, and then if that came back with the majority saying that they were happy to have this scheme there, then we put the scheme in for 12 months on an experimental order. Then after the 12 months, we'd reconsult the same people to see if they wanted it to continue. And the two that we've done for that so far have both said yes, they wanted it to continue. Whereas now we're just putting them straight in and just under experimental orders again for a year, and then just sending notification letters to residents and local groups, councillors, etc., just to notify them when it's happening. In plenty of time, though, I've sent sort of a series of sort of 2 to 3 letters, I think, for the ones that are coming in September, both to the schools and to residents themselves. Yeah, the question was asked about successes. I think, as I've just mentioned, when we used to consult on schemes, I'll give an example for Gospel Oak, a school in Camden, in Gospel Oak. The consultation for that, initially there was, let me just get the figures, I think it's something like, when we first consulted on it, 78% of respondents agreed with the proposal to put the school street in, 21% disagreed. And then after the year, when we reconsulted, once it was in, we got 93% of respondents strongly agreeing with making the scheme permanent. So, and only 7% disagreeing. So kind of, I guess that shows that, and out of that, 100% of the parents at the school wanted to keep the scheme, and 86% of respondents that were resident in the area on where the school was on that actual road wanted to make it permanent. So I guess that shows that once the scheme is in, those concerns perhaps are diminished somewhat once they see how it's working and the benefits of it. I do find, from a personal point of view, it's quite challenging sometimes to really push those benefits. Everything that the previous speakers have spoken about, the air quality, just the relaxed nature of the school outside compared with how it used to be with poor parking, with road safety concerns, etc. From a council point of view, that can be quite a difficult thing to really big up, if you like. So again, it's great to have support from organisations to help with that. Next point was monitoring. Yes, with all the schemes that I've worked on, we've always done pre and post scheme traffic monitoring and air quality monitoring and school travel data. One of the things we do ask, and this has been mentioned previously, we do ask that the schools are part of the STARS programme, partly to help us to know how the pupils were travelling before and how they travel afterwards, and to get those kind of figures before and after. That's really useful. But it also shows the school's commitment to wanting to encourage active travel as well, if they're on STARS and they're already doing great work with Sus Transport or cycling schemes or whatever it is they're doing, all the different things that you can do as part of STARS. That's, yeah, it's really kind of great for us to work with schools that are doing that sort of stuff already, and the school street kind of complements all of that. Whoa, what was the next thing? Experimental traffic orders. I think I've covered that, but I can talk more about it afterwards. Yeah. I mean, dealing with complaints was one of the things in the suggested things to talk about. That's just part of the course. Yeah, we just, say how now that we've got sort of 3 or 4 school streets in place, We can say how they've worked in that area, and how those, once they're in, those kind of concerns are often not such a real reality once it's in there. And you know, we are putting them in under an experimental order. If there's something major that doesn't work within the year, we can look to change that, or you know, or if it's a major deal, then we can look at what the problem is and see if we can do anything to change it or improve it. Yeah, so that's, yeah, council's perspective. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, in terms of sort of choosing schools as to how we choose which schools to do them at, it's been, up till now, it's been kind of a combination of the schools getting in touch with us, perhaps parents, and ourselves just looking at the roads and seeing, or knowing from experience, where we get a lot of complaints about, you know, poor parking outside the school or safety concerns. We've now got a criteria list, so that list, you know, includes road safety concerns, how engaged the school has been, how engaged residents have been, what sort of things are coming up in the area. It includes air quality outside the school, traffic. If this was mentioned earlier, if the school is on a TfL major route or a bus route, it's unlikely that we'll look at it. They work better on residential side streets. There's just, you know, less issues to kind of deal with. So far we haven't put any in on those sort of routes. So yeah, we've now basically got a scoring system that we can sort of check against. It's interesting though, that the teacher and parents' influence is really great. I mean, from Camden's point of view, it's more come from the council, and the council approaches the school. It hasn't so far been so much as teachers approaching the council or parents so much. It's been more us going to the schools. It would be, I mean, it's great to have it coming from the schools or coming from parents as well. From a council perspective, I think that's great, because we can then, you know, put out in our information how much people want that. We did have a citizen space thing up during COVID while we were implementing various emergency measures like the pavement widening and stuff. School streets was included in that, so we've got data from that we're able to use as we roll out our next wave of school streets in Camden. So that's been really useful, and you know, we may well use that again. Yeah, one of the other benefits that I don't think's been mentioned is that as we've started to put them in and started to look at which schools to do the schemes on, we also look at, is there a rat running issue here? If we look at the traffic data, we can tell very often that there's rat running going past the school. It's not just about school run traffic sometimes for the schools. So if we can cut that down as well, we're sort of killing two birds with one stone. So that can be quite a useful thing as well that we'll look at. Yeah, so that's me. I haven't been able to look at the chat, but yeah.
No, I'll do a Q&A. Michelle, thank you so much. That was really insightful. I actually have the impression that quite a few of the questions that I've been seeing coming up in the chat were incidentally responded to you proactively, like a minute later. That was really great to hear. Thank you so much. I will now do a bit of a Q&A, if it is all right with everyone. We are running, I think, about 10 minutes late. So if it is all right, I will run the webinar but end promptly at 9:10, just to give us a little bit more time for a Q&A. So we have 15 minutes now, and then I can do a wrap up. If this does not work for people, we will not be insulted if you drop out, and you will be able to listen to the last 10 minutes afterwards in the recording as well. I will start a Q&A now. I would also like to reiterate that if you have a question which we're not going to respond to tonight because there's many questions or because we missed it in the chat or whatever, just email us and we can also forward them to the brilliant presenters tonight, and possibly they might be able to respond. But, you know, really get in touch. I'm just going to start with those questions that I can, okay, in the remaining time. So, well, interestingly, the first question was sort of to Mums for Lungs, whether we would be pushing for any new planned schools to already have a school street automatically. I would like to say that is a brilliant idea. You're absolutely right, whoever asked that question. New schools should immediately have air pollution considerations built into them. That should be an absolute vital part of where you build a school, things like that. I think that's a brilliant idea. Next Mums for Lungs meeting, 9th of September, I think you're all very welcome to join. Email us about that. A really interesting question here. What's the percentage of school journeys in London done by car, especially considering the very small catchment areas? I wonder if any of the speakers knows anything about that, because I don't.
I can give a bit of a non-answer answer. It's very hard to say because a school like Bessemer Grange, for example, doesn't have a small catchment. School children from all over Southwark could have been assigned a place there most years that my children have been at the school, and the smallest the catchment has ever got would be a circle 2 kilometres in diameter. And siblings can often come from further away. Some schools will have very small catchments. Some independent schools will have children travelling, you know, over 20 or 30 kilometres, often by coach, to get there. So you can't really say. Each school should, if they're part of TfL Stars, they will be doing an internal survey to look at how their own pupils are travelling to school. And there's obviously, to escalate up the levels from bronze, silver to gold, you have to try and shift your population away from using the car to get to school. But there will always be some schools that have a very high proportion of people using cars, and some schools which inherently have small catchments and lower proportions of people using cars.
Thank you, Etta. I think there's also this other status there, which, if I remember rightly, is that about 30% of London's car rides are under 2 miles or something like that. So, you know, it might not just be school runs which are driven, but many of us, many Londoners are able to travel actively for 2 miles, and yet the car is a very popular option for these. And to an extent, I always have this idea that London will be full of school streets in the mornings and in the afternoons, and that as well might deter other people who are actually not on the school run themselves from driving at those times, and hopefully stop them from driving generally. Here is a question for Etta, I think. What will our defence be to those who say that closing roads could cause congestion and thus increase pollution in other areas, and that there will be parents who need to drive to drop off, pick up their children on the way to and back from work, etc. And related to that, there was a question, what about did you see any like displaced traffic as a result of Bessemer? And I think on the displaced traffic, perhaps Michelle can afterwards say a few words as well.
So the first thing I'd say, it's important to know your community and to make sure that your school street is implemented to work for your community. So if we have parents who absolutely had to drive, we had both east and west side of the school areas where you could park and stride, as we call it. So you could park your car and just walk the final part of your journey to really keep the cars away from the school gates, to keep that area safe. And then also we had a number of parents who realised that actually perhaps they didn't have to drive quite so much as they thought they did. They were driving because it was convenient to drive to school, drop their child off and drive on to work. But actually with that 200-metre walk where you had to actually stop and park rather than just eject your child out the side of the car as you drove past, actually it became not significantly more convenient to drive to school, and people did stop. Now, in terms of was there traffic that shifted to other areas, not so much for our school, but then we did have quite a small proportion of parents driving. There's much bigger traffic studies, and Hammersmith Bridge closure is actually one of the most, I think the most recent and biggest accidental studies on what happens when you make driving less convenient. And the truth is that people do stop driving. So although some areas around Hammersmith Bridge have seen traffic increase, some other areas have seen significant decrease in traffic. And the overall number of car journeys in the area, in the vicinity of Hammersmith Bridge, has gone down very significantly. I don't know the exact figures at the moment, but it was a remarkable number of journeys that disappeared. And it's a really well-known phenomenon called traffic evaporation that really does happen.
Thank you. That is really helpful. Yeah, so I remember the figures were something like a quarter of all car rides, 9,000 out of I think 27,000 cars that used to cross Hammersmith Bridge did no longer seem to do the journey from north to south or south to North London at any given day. So, you know, and that was a completely unplanned change. Yes, thank you very much. Michelle, do you see these kind of opposition a lot with displacement, and what is your experience in Camden?
Yeah, that is usually one of the major objections to schemes or concerns. And as I say, the few that we've done, we've monitored the traffic, and there hasn't been a huge displacement of traffic, and in general the area as a whole has reduced. So, and certainly obviously the areas just outside the school where the closure is has reduced significantly. But yeah, that some roads may get a small increase, but generally as the scheme goes on it reduces further. So
thank you. So there is another question for Michelle. How do people apply for exemptions to School Street?
At the moment we've got an online form, so you fill that in if with a drop down list as to who is eligible for an exemption. We're dealing with it that way at the moment. Thank you.
Also another one for Michelle, while I've got you here. Sorry. So the process of getting an emergency traffic order, is this a straightforward process? Does it vary by council? And someone said, I thought I had read in the COVID transportation grants that it was an easy process.
It probably does vary from council to council. Is it an easy process, as in that there is a process? It kind of depends on workloads of the people who write and advertise the traffic orders within our teams at the council, really, as to how quickly we can get those in place. It's more the planning beforehand so that we know exactly what we're going to put in the traffic order, as in how exactly the scheme is working and what the technicalities of it are, because that all needs to be put in the order. So there's all that to do first before you write the order, advertise it, and go through the legal processes. So variable.
Okay. Oh, thank you. So that's really interesting. So it's the local things that are more complex in a way than the legal process. Thank you. Sorry, there is one question. I'm local to Bessemer, and I'm also interested if any other local schools are interested in getting a School Street. I feel that probably Etta and Amy, you might know that.
Yeah, so I say if you're local, it's really worth looking at the Dulwich and Herne Hill Safe Routes to School forum on the internet, as obviously that's a collaboration of 18 schools across that wider area, and you might be able to find schools there that can help. But again, as Etta said, it's always really helpful to come along and see a School Street in practice. So if you can come past and see what's happening at Bessemer, it might be useful. And then, yes, have a real think about what your what your school community is, who your local school counsellor is, and get in touch with them and have a talk to the head teacher and see what's been going on. and that's how you'll find out. But yes, I recommend, in our local, we're very lucky with our Safe Routes to School forum.
Thank you. Yes, we work with them quite a bit as well. We have a Facebook group, which I haven't spoken about at all this webinar yet. We have a Facebook group of parents, and when people give us the permission, we can put them in touch with each other if they are parents from the same school interested in school streets. So the Facebook group is called Mums for Long School Streets. So if you're interested, join us there on Facebook or drop us an email, and we can see if we might know other peer parents at a school you're at who we can put you in touch with. There were a few questions around the advantages and disadvantages, and I've seen the discussion in the chat about the ANPR cameras and retractable bollards. So what is pros and cons? What is cost? And what makes it easy, not easy to implement a school street? And related to that is the question around who puts up retractable bollards at the schools? Is that a team of volunteers? I feel this is a mixture of questions, which I'll hand over to perhaps Michelle and then Amy.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we are going more down the ANPR route, but if we work with a school, or if we've chosen a site and it seems more suitable to put bollards up, then we'll do that. It does need the school's support for that. As I said, yeah, it's a team. I think at St Joseph's there's 2 people that are trained to do it. So one sort of stands by while the other one does the lifting and putting back in. So other schools that I've spoken to would have safety concerns about doing that. It throws up some insurance questions for them, for the school possibly. So they don't want to get into that. So for a lot of schools, ANPR is preferable. Yeah, there's other, I know Westminster are using a variety of not just bollards, they're using sort of stretchy barriers, temporary barriers. They seem to be getting a lot of schools who are willing to put those up and put them down again. So yeah, it really varies from location to location. Even in Camden, every location where a school is a different location. There's different issues. Sometimes it just would be unsafe for somebody to stand at a busy junction doing bollards, so it just really varies.
Thank you. Etta or Amy, how do you do it?
So it's our premises managers, and I suppose it's just the point is it sort of depends on how much time or school resources are already being used, sort of marshalling what's happening. Because it was it felt so dangerous outside of the school gates, there were sort of most days of the week, I think one of our senior leadership team might have ended up out there trying to sort of talk to parents or stop them doing what they were doing. So and then having the sort of emails or the discussions about what was happening afterwards, actually it was sort of more time efficient. I think it was a decision they were quite happy to take, to sort of go with the bollards. But I think, and also because we were sort of doing a trial at the beginning and the barriers were there, but I think it is about how quickly you want the scheme to move, what money is available, and how quickly you want it to be safer, I think, for everybody. But yeah, there are pros and cons, I think, with the approach we've got, and our premises managers aren't always very happy about the extra time it takes.
Thank you.
I was wondering if I could just contribute something here as well, that it also depends on the overall aims, because obviously the physical barriers allow you to repurpose the street, whereas an ANPR camera, you still have residents who can drive through, and it doesn't make it a traffic-free environment. And those are really important distinctions, because in a bollard situation, children can be much more relaxed about how they're using the space outside school. But when you have ANPR cameras, it's still very much a road. And there are the safety implications for that, but it also won't give you the additional road space to use for social distancing. So certainly at this point, it would seem that movable physical barriers would give the bigger advantages. But again, there are a lot of issues around not only the resources, but also having been the person who put up physical barriers for quite a long time, you can get quite a lot of abusive behaviour. as you're doing it, and that's really unpleasant, and you can't really necessarily ask a school facilities officer to engage with that or to police the behaviour of the school community. So you have to really have people on board if you're going to use physical barriers.
Thank you. I think this was really insightful. Lambeth is going to do a mixture, for example. So Lambeth is starting, I think, 16 school streets next week, and their cameras were no longer available in time. And because these are trials as well, I think there's sort of a consideration about the costs before these school streets have definitely made permanent. And for insurance reason, it has to be apparently school staff that puts a retractable bollard out and back in. So 4 times a day, someone has to do something about it. But then they hope to go permanent with ANPR. But actually, hearing from Etta, I will, have a think if we might suggest to them to think about bollards, something like that, if that is possible, depending on the locality. So, yeah, thank you. I think we should wrap up now, just because we said it would be a quick and easy one. Sorry, one second. I'm trying to share my screen again, but now I've gotten a bit lost. 1 second, please.
Do you want me to help?
Yes, please. If you could, can you share my screen?
Yeah, but you'll have to choose the window. So
okay.
Can you click the green share screen at the bottom and then select the window you want to, if you can find your presentation.
Oh God, I'm so embarrassed. Sorry about this. Here we go. Okay, so I'm sharing, right?
Yeah, now just click present and then.
Okay, so here we are. So thank you very much, everyone. I think that was really insightful. I think we all really heard a lot, and we sort of did a quick sum up of the steps towards the school street. And I'm glad to hear that after this webinar, I still think this is the right order. It starts with chats, parents connecting, getting counsellors on board, school staff committed. And here, that I think the element about the what's next is really about knowing your community. I think that was a really helpful and interesting point everyone made, that you need to know what the objections of local parents are, or school parents at the school, what the concerns and objections of local residents are, and what the locality of the school allows to be done, and how a school street can be implemented. Yeah, and as I've said before, please do get in touch. We can put you in touch with other people, and are always keen to support and help. There's a number of resources here that have been mentioned before. So there's the Hackney toolkit, there is an emergency template letter, a corona context on our websites. We've got a new school streets flyer, and we're going to do a campaign document in the next 2 days, which is in a way going to be a very quick abbreviation of a lot of the things we discussed here today. Please join our Facebook group. There's been amazing evidence recently by Sustrans and the Edinburgh Napier University on the evidence review around school streets. So there's lots of stuff to look around and to give you more information if that is helpful. And then lastly, I think I would just like to really thank our speakers. I would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight. And I hope this has given you some ideas of how you can ask for a school street, or how you can disarm counter arguments against a school street. So thank you very much. We will be in touch with further information, but do sign up on our website to our newsletter, because we're always doing campaigns and other things, and we'd love to have you on board for our next campaign in a few weeks' time, where we want to put up posters encouraging active travel and remind people of air pollution, a ditch pollution campaign and poster. So it would be lovely to have you join us for that. So lastly, I think this is the end. Thank you, all of you, for joining, most amazingly the speakers, and please get in touch if you have thoughts, feedback or questions. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
My mom's gonna murder me. Come on, I'll radio if she comes. Ah, you're a nice guy. You told me out here so you can make your move. Oh, because you're such a friend.